1959 was perhaps the most significant year in the whole of Grand Prix motor racing history, certainly in the history of the World Championship. In the non-championship races at the beginning of the year, for the very first time the new 2.5-litre Coventry Climax unit was being seen. There'd been a significant turnaround in the drivers for 1959. Berra had moved from BRM and had gone off to Ferrari. Van Wall having retired, Moss was now at the wheel of a Rob Walker Cooper full-time. Salvadori had left Cooper and had moved on to the new team of Aston Martin in Formula One. Katie Moss sits in the family Facel Vaga. Sterling is trying the BRM for the first time. He was very impressed with the way that it went at Goodwood, and is seen here lapping with the car that Harry Schell had driven there. He took the 2.5-litre car around the Goodwood circuit faster than it had ever been round before, and was very impressed indeed by this front-engined car. A lot more impressed than with the 2.5-litre BRM engine in the back of the Cooper that had been built for Moss to drive for Rob Walker. This car, extensively modified, theoretically could have been Bruce McLaren putting his numbers on. You don't see drivers doing that today. And here's the grid with Jean Berra at the wheel of the Ferrari. The only occasion he was to drive a car at Aintree of this type. It was, of course, his final season. Moss in the Cooper BRM went on to lead comparatively easily. He'd not been particularly quick in practice, but in the race it all looked well. Jack Brabham was giving him a fair run for his money, and at this stage of the season, when Aston Martin wasn't available, Roy Salvadori was going well with the Maserati-engined Cooper. But Moss was to retire the Cooper, and never drove this car in competition again, although it was taken to Monaco. The third of the non-championship races was the Daily Express Trophy, and for this, Moss had a Works BRM. He played musical cars with the BRM team prior to practice because Moss was never satisfied unless he had absolutely the very, very best chance. Here's Ron Flockhart, a long-time servant of BRM, and Jack Brabham at the wheel of the Cooper. Tony Brooks here at the wheel of the new Ferrari. And the debut of the Aston Martin, under the watchful eyes of Fangio, now retired, was to be made, with at the wheel of it Roy Salvadori, and at the wheel of the second car Carroll Shelby. Reg Parnell presiding, and with the bib overalls, Shelby having a look at the practice times. More pictures, and the Astons certainly looked the part. But this was the final year of any real front-engine car standing a chance in motor racing. At the start, away they went, with undoubtedly a huge, huge battle ahead, but everyone feeling that Moss should have things sewn up quite nicely. John Wire looks on from the pits. Unfortunately, it was a problem once again that was to sideline Moss and the BRM. It left Brabham and Salvadori to fight it out with Cooper and Aston Martin respectively. Shelby's blow-up, however, was the first sign that the Aston Martin 2.5-litre engine would not take the stick that it needed to do on the revs if it was to win races. Nevertheless, Sir David Brown looked pleased as his car came round in second place, within seeing distance, if not within touching distance, of Jack Brabham. The flag came out, Brabham won, and Salvadori was second. And Moss had already delivered a lecture to BRM about the fact that he would never again drive a works car. The result of this was that a car was allowed to go to British Racing Partnership to be prepared for Moss to drive on occasions. Flockhart comes through to finish his place in the race, as Moss, now aboard a Cooper, and not the BRM engine one, but the 2.5-litre Coventry Climax engine one, was to take part in the race here at Monaco. By now, there were certain modifications being made to the Works Cooper and also to the Walker car. Walker's cars were having to run with the Calotti gearbox, which once again was giving trouble, not due to design but due to bad manufacture. At the start, Jean Berra was away in the lead with the Ferrari. Moss tucked in second place with the Walker Cooper, and then Jack Brabham with the Works car. In spite of the understeer and the tail sliding out there under par, Berra was going well. He picked up something of a lead on Moss in the early stages, but Sterling was just biding his time. In those days, there was still overtaking to be done at Monaco. But it could be difficult. Berra, with the checkered band round the hat, was to hold the lead for a considerable time. When he fell out, however, it was Moss who took over the lead. BRMs were going badly. Here Flockhart spins. He was unable to restart. He'd stalled the engine. And Moss led right the way up till the 82nd lap, when unfortunately a problem intervened. Thus it was Brabham who was able to come through to take the win, and not Stirling Moss as everyone expected.
I mean, we didn't get much help. I mean, Cooper wouldn't sell us his gearbox. We did get the Climax engines, so we had a few hurdles to cross, which was shown obviously by the use of the Carlotti gearbox, which could have been and should have been a great gearbox, but it wasn't made out of material that was good enough, and therefore it let us down.
The 1959 World Championship was to become a battle between three drivers. Brabham, with of course the Works Cooper, Moss, driving both the Walker Cooper and the BRM, as we shall see, and Tony Brooks with the Ferrari. Brooks, to a degree, was a man with one hand tied behind his back. The next round of the championship, following Brabham's victory at Monaco, the Dutch Grand Prix saw Aston Martin take part in its first Grand Épreuve. It was clear that the top end of the car wasn't right. It couldn't be revved without the engine braking, and nothing that Salvadori and Shelby could do could make the slightest bit of difference. The cars had been very disappointing in practice. Quick in practice, however, had been the BRMs, and one of them, Joe Bonnier, was in pole position, with Brabham in the middle of the front row and Moss on the outside. After the Duke of Kent had shaken further hands, it was the start of the race, and a very good start too for Joe Bonnier in the BRM. In the early stages, everybody expected the Coopers to go well and perhaps to see off the BRM threat, but on this occasion it wasn't to be. For many in the crowd, and indeed for many in the paddock, the BRM victory in 1959 at Zandvoort was perhaps very special indeed. BRM had been trying so hard for so long, but now at last they had some reward. Aston Martins both retired comparatively early. They were not on the pace and were not to be seen again to the British Grand Prix. Salvadori, with a sullen-looking Reg Parnell, chats in the pit. Graham Hill there was pressuring hard on Moss's tail, or so it appeared. But out front, the BRM was going well, and although the Ferraris weren't on the pace, there was little question that there was going to be quite a battle for the rest of the season if BRM continued to race like this. Behind the battling Bonnier was Moss and Brabham as per usual, and once again Moss found himself in trouble. There was a brief battle between Brabham and Bonnier, but Bonnier got the better of that as well. Must and Gregory backed up well in the Cooper. Ines Ireland in his first Grand Prix finished in 4th place, and Jean Berra finished in 5th in the first of the Ferraris, ahead of Phil Hill. Brooks was a retirement. And so Bonnier was to take BRM's first ever Grand Prix victory. It was indeed a remarkable performance by the British team at last to win this race and to win a Grand Prix that had for so long eluded them. For Bonnier too, it was a maiden Grand Prix victory. The 2.5-litre P25 BRM was perhaps the fastest of all the front-engine cars in 1959. Theoretically, it should have done better. Unfortunately, it didn't, and this was the sole win of the year for the P25. Sunbathing is a pleasant way to spend an afternoon. Nowadays, racing drivers are rarely seen out of their caravans, so when they get a suntan, I'm not quite sure. Moss has always been fond of swimming, and a lot of fun went on in these hot, steamy days before the French Grand Prix. Practice saw Moss once again being a man to watch at the wheel of a different car. In this case, it was the 2.5-litre British Racing Partnership BRM. Surprisingly to some, he wasn't as quick as had been expected, being on the second row, with Brooks leading Brabham and Hill in the first three. Phil Hill had been instrumental in driving a tactical race which had seen Hawthorn win the World Championship in the previous year. He was often at his best on a fast circuit, but here no one was going to catch Brooks, who drove the Ferrari superbly. Salvadori had problems with the Maserati engine Cooper, Aston Martin once again were not entered, and Moss was not able to head the Ferrari opposition. It was an extremely hot day. Moss spun the car towards the final part of the race and had a great deal of difficulty pushing it out of harm's way. Eventually, he was unable to restart, basically suffering from heat exhaustion. It was Ferrari 1-2, Brooks from Hill, with Brabham in third place. Roy Salvadori and a line of Austin Healey frog-eyed sprites, Carroll Shelby there next to him, parading prior to the start of the British Grand Prix at Aintree in 1959. The Astons once more had returned to the fray. Development work had taken place, and in practice they'd certainly flattered. But was it but to deceive? Either way, Roy was in the middle of the front row, with Brabham on his left and Shell on his right. Here he talks to Parnell prior to the start of the race. Lord Howe once again chatting with Sir David Brown. The national anthem and the drivers stand at attention. Lofty England, an old protagonist of Reg Parnell, chats away at the start, as Shell, the other occupant of the front row, is about to get aboard the BRM. Moss was on the third row, once again with the BRP BRM. Some way back too was Joe Bonnier. The other Cooper climaxes were going well, however, with Maurice Trintignant and Gregory on the second row and the young Bruce McLaren on the third. The Aston Martins had been filled to the brim prior to the start. Reg Parnell had warned the drivers there might be a little bit of fuel spillage. At that start, into the lead briefly went Salvadori till he got to the first corner and put the brakes on. He then was almost drowned in a sea of petrol. Nevertheless, he hung on to second place with Shell in third, and in fourth place there, Muston Gregory. Moss was quite well up with the BRM, but Shelby was having an unhappy time with his Aston Martin as well. Roy pressed on, but soon decided that to head for the pits was the only thing to do. Once that had been accomplished, with a still healthy car, he was able to fight his way back up the field to sixth place. But the chance of a good showing and a British Grand Prix was at an end, and Reg Parnell's face shows his disappointment. If 10th to 6th wasn't bad for Salvadori and the British Racing Green Aston Martin, the next real race that was going on was the one that started to develop for second and third places. Moss in the BRP BRM was a little disappointing. Nevertheless, he was fighting it out and was up to second place. But also going well too was the young Bruce McLaren. The New Zealander was in his first full season of Grand Prix racing, a tremendous talent. As other cars fell by the wayside, including Brooks and the low-line Van Wall in its one-off start, Ferrari weren't able to go because of a strike, Moss came into the pits for a quick stop. He'd picked up a puncture on the BRM, and thus any chance he had of catching Brabham went out the window. Back in the race, however, he was pressing on as fast as ever, anxious, if at all possible, to stay ahead and to beat the second of the Cooper team in the shape of Bruce McLaren. It all seemed as if he would, and it would all fall into place. Unfortunately, when they changed the tyre, they hadn't checked out whether or not they had enough fuel to finish the race. As it was, they didn't. And Moss once again tore into the pits for a splash of fuel prior to the finish. A push start after a surprise stop, which didn't go down too well at all with Moss or the team, and he was back in the race, but having to fight hard to get up from third place and overtake McLaren to snatch back second. And that was the way that they finished at the flag, with Brabham the winner, Moss in second place and McLaren in third. It had been a brilliant drive on behalf of the young New Zealander, and Moss once again had proved that he was the master. But the rear-engine revolution was really in place. God moves in a mysterious way. But even he couldn't fathom, I think, why the German Grand Prix was held at Avus in 1959 once again, and not at the Nürburgring. The Avus circuit originally consisted of two straights with a banked corner at each end, but since one of those ends was in East Germany, they had to get rid of it and have a normal corner. Thus it had one banked corner. It was shorter than the original circuit was, which was perhaps a bit of a mercy. It was still, however, very fast. It was over this banking that Jean Behra had lost his life earlier in the day. The race was run in two heats. Tyre troubles were always something of a problem here, and it seemed to be the easy way of solving what was to be something of an extremely unfortunate race. Gurney here giving one of the Coopers a hard time, and Moss retiring from the first heat and taking no part in the event thereafterwards was not a great help. And here is Hans Hermann in the BRM, which was to come to such a sad end. Fortunately, Hermann himself was unhurt in the situation that occurred. I think it's the old story of dust yourself down, pick yourself up, and start all over again. A good race here had been run by Marston Gregory. He was the victim of the Liberace from Dan Gurney that we saw earlier on, and became a retirement, however. Brooks was the winner, which once again opened up his championship chances, with Gurney in second place in the first heat, and in the second heat it was still Brooks who came past the flag first, with Phil Hill this time hanging on. Overall it was Brooks, Gurney and Hill, a first, second and third for Ferrari. In the Portuguese Grand Prix, it was a different story once again. Astons were back again on a circuit that by anybody's recommendation was not the safest in the world. Moss, however, drove exceptionally well, and the gearbox held together on this occasion to see him take the flag with Gregory in second place after poor Jack Brabham got tangled up with a back marker and had one of the very few accidents during his Grand Prix career. The Astons were back again too, not really on the pace, but at least reliable enough for Salvadori to get to the finish of the race in sixth place and score just 1 point. BRMs were out of the hunt, and Moss took victory to keep his championship chances alive. The Italian Grand Prix saw another battle royal. Moss now was in irrepressible form, and this was a circuit that was expected to suit the Ferraris. Sterling was a tenth faster than everybody else in practice, Brooks was in the middle of the front row and Brabham on the outside of it as they set off. And soon, once again, it was Moss in charge, and that was the way it stayed. Brooks was to retire with an engine problem on lap 1. Brabham was to drop back to third place, and Moss it was who came through to win, with Phil Hill in second place and Jack Brabham in third. In the USA, Brooks could still have won, but then it all went wrong for him.
And on the first lap, Taffy von Trips, one of my teammates, rams me up the rear, and I finish up the escape road. I then had a very, very difficult decision to make because, as you know from earlier in the evening, I'd told myself, look, I'm not going to drive a car which is substandard mechanically. I've got away with it twice, the BRM and the Aston Martin. You know, I must never do this again. You know, just tempting Providence. So I had the longest minute of my life going round, you know, back to the driving around the circuit on the first lap to decide whether to go into the pits and have this car checked out and throw away the championship, or continue, you know, with still the chance of winning the championship. I forced myself to come into the pits, and you know, when I say forced, that's the sort of strongest word I can think of, but it's not really adequate because it really was a mental struggle. And they checked the car over, and okay, there was nothing, you know, amiss. But the point is, you know, there may have been, and I'm here today able to tell you the story. I rejoined the race and finished third, and because I lost a lap. And you know, obviously, it's motor racing full of ifs and buts. But you know, there would have been the chance because of what happened to other people in the race to have finished first and the World Championship. But as I say, Sterling didn't win the World Championship either. I finished up second. So I'm here, as I keep saying, telling you the story. So I'm happy with that.
Moss's chances fell over when his transmission played up again.
The engine we had enormous torque, all the Climaxes did, and I would change gear at low revs. I would, instead of going up to 7,000 or 6.8 we were allowed, I would change gear at about 5.5, thinking, well, I'm saving the engine, which I was. By changing at 5,005, of course, I'm putting all the bang through the gearbox. Changing with maximum torque would put more through the gearbox and spinning it up. And I probably would have revved the engine up to 6.5 instead of 5.8 or whatever I did, and saved the gearbox and done better, but I didn't know that.
And while Jack Brabham ran out of fuel and finished fourth, the victory roll was for Bruce McLaren's win in the Cooper, his first Grand Prix, and for Jack's first World Championship. The rear-engine revolution had come to stay. And even if Jack was pushing it over the line, it was the first of 3 victories in her World Championship for him.
Well, yes, I knew I had to get across the line with the car. And of course, I led the race right up to the last 500 or 600 yards. And because the car ran out of petrol, and I had to push it over the last few yards over the line. And but it did clinch the championship for me, so it was worth pushing. It was uphill too.